About 320 million years ago, Earth was home to insects far larger than anything alive today. The skies were filled with giant dragonflies whose wings stretched wider than many birds, while huge millipedes, large scorpions, and other unusual creatures lived in thick forests. Warm weather, rich plant life, and high oxygen levels helped these animals grow to remarkable sizes. This was a time long before dinosaurs appeared, when insects were among the most successful forms of life on land and in the air. Their fossils provide valuable information about an ancient world filled with unusual animals, major environmental changes, and the early development of life that helped shape the natural world we know today. Before giant insects appeared, Earth had already existed for a very long time. The planet had passed through many important stages that slowly changed its surface, its air, its seas, and the forms of life that lived upon it. The world during those early times looked very different from the planet we know today. There were no people, no birds, no flowering plants, no mammals, and no dinosaurs. The land, the oceans, and the atmosphere were still changing through natural processes that had been active since Earth first formed. These changes happened over millions of years, allowing simple living things to become more complex and preparing the conditions that later supported larger plants and animals. In the earliest part of Earth's history, the surface was extremely hot. Large amounts of melted rock covered wide areas. Volcanoes were very active and released huge amounts of gases into the air. The atmosphere was not suitable for animals that breathe oxygen. It contained gases such as carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, ammonia, and nitrogen. Oxygen was either completely absent or present in very tiny amounts. The sky would not have looked the same as it does today, because the atmosphere had a very different mixture of gases and particles. As the planet slowly cooled, the outer layer became solid rock. Rain fell over long periods and collected in low places, forming the first oceans. Rivers also carried water across the land into these growing seas. The oceans became the home of the earliest living things. Scientists believed that simple life appeared in water because the oceans offered a more stable environment than the dry land, which faced strong sunlight, changing temperatures, and very little protection from harmful radiation. The earliest forms of life were tiny organisms that could only be seen with special equipment. These simple living things had no bones, no shells, and no complex body parts. They reproduced and slowly spread through the oceans. Some gained energy from chemicals found in the water, while others later developed the ability to use sunlight to produce food through photosynthesis. This process slowly changed Earth's atmosphere because it released oxygen as a waste product. The first organisms that produced oxygen did not immediately fill the atmosphere with this gas. Much of the oxygen reacted with iron and other materials found in the oceans and rocks. Over many millions of years, these reactions continued until more oxygen was able to remain in the atmosphere. This gradual increase changed the planet in important ways. Many older organisms that could not survive in oxygen-rich conditions disappeared, while new kinds of living things developed that could use oxygen to release energy from food more efficiently. As oxygen became more common, another important change took place high above Earth's surface. Some oxygen molecules combined to form ozone. This ozone gathered into a layer high in the atmosphere that helped block much of the harmful ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun. With better protection from this radiation, living things gained greater chances to survive outside water, although this movement onto land would happen much later. For a long time, nearly all life remained in the oceans. The seas contained many kinds of tiny organisms that floated with the currents or lived on the sea floor. Over millions of years, some organisms developed more complex bodies. Cells began working together in larger groups, creating living things with different body parts that performed different jobs. This change allowed life to become more varied. The oceans slowly filled with many different forms of life. Soft-bodied animals appeared first. Later, some organisms developed hard outer coverings or simple skeletons. These structures helped protect them from danger and supported their bodies. Small sea animals crawled across the ocean floor, floated through the water, or buried themselves in mud. Many different feeding methods developed as life became more diverse. The continents also changed during this time. Earth's outer shell was not fixed in one position. Huge pieces of rock, known as tectonic plates, slowly moved across the planet's surface. These movements happened very slowly, yet over millions of years they changed the shape of the continents and oceans. Land areas joined together, separated, and moved into new positions. Mountains rose where plates pushed against each other. Deep ocean trenches formed where one plate moved beneath another. Volcanoes continued releasing gases and fresh rock onto the surface. Weather also shaped the land. Rain wore down mountains and carried broken rock into rivers. Rivers transported mud, sand, and small stones into lakes and seas. Wind moved loose soil across dry regions. Waves slowly changed coastlines. These natural forces worked every day over countless generations, slowly changing Earth's appearance. The climate changed many times during these early ages. Some periods were warmer while others became colder. Ice covered parts of the planet during certain times. In other periods, much of the Earth remained warm. Changes in volcanic activity, the movement of continents, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the position of land and sea all affected the climate. Living things had to survive these changing conditions or disappear. Long before giant insects existed, plants had not yet covered the land. The continents were mostly made of bare rock, loose soil, and sand. Rivers flowed through empty valleys. Strong winds moved across open landscapes with very little to slow them down. Without large plants, the land looked very different from later ages when forests spread across wide regions. The first attempts by living things to survive on land were made by tiny organisms. Some forms of bacteria and simple algae lived in wet places where water remained available. They covered damp rocks and muddy surfaces. These early communities slowly changed the ground by helping break down rocks into smaller particles. This process slowly created the first thin layers of soil. Fungi also became important. They helped break down dead material and returned nutrients to the environment. Some fungi formed close relationships with early plants. This partnership allowed plants to absorb water and minerals more effectively, while providing food made through photosynthesis to the fungi. These relationships became an important part of life on land. The earliest land plants were very simple. They had no flowers, no seeds, and no deep roots, like many modern plants. They stayed close to wet places because they depended on water for reproduction. Their bodies remained small and low to the ground. They slowly spread across moist soils, riverbanks, and shallow wetlands. As plants slowly became more successful on land, they changed the environment around them. Their roots helped hold soil together. Dead plant material collected on the ground and slowly formed richer soils. These changes made it easier for more plants to grow. Areas that had once been mostly bare rock gradually became covered with green life. Small animals soon followed the plants onto land. Many of these early land animals were related to creatures that had lived in the oceans. They had to solve many problems before they could survive away from water. They needed ways to breathe air, avoid drying out, find food, and reproduce. Natural selection slowly favored those with useful features that allowed survival on land. Among the earliest successful land animals were creatures related to modern arthropods. This large group included the ancestors of insects, spiders, scorpions, and many other animals with hard outer coverings and jointed legs. Their waterproof outer layer helped reduce water loss. Their strong legs allowed them to move across land. Their small bodies required less food than larger animals. At first, these early arthropods remained small. They lived among simple plants, moist soil, and fallen plant material. Many fed on dead organic matter, fungi, or tiny living organisms. Others became hunters of even smaller creatures. These early food relationships slowly became more complex as more kinds of plants and animals appeared. The atmosphere continued changing throughout these long ages. Oxygen levels slowly increased because plants and algae continued producing it through photosynthesis. This increase happened over millions of years rather than suddenly. The amount of oxygen did not remain the same throughout Earth's history. It rose and fell at different times depending on the balance between plant growth, decay, fires, volcanic activity, and other natural processes. Large forests had not yet formed during the earliest stages of life on land. Most plants remained short and simple. Gradually, new plant groups developed stronger stems and better systems for carrying water inside their bodies. These changes allowed plants to grow taller and survive farther from permanent water. New forms of vegetation spread across larger areas. As taller plants appeared, they created new places where animals could live. Leaves provided food, stems offered shelter. Damp ground beneath plants stayed cooler and retained more moisture. Dead leaves and stems built thick layers of organic material where tiny animals could hide. The environment became richer and supported more kinds of life. Life in the oceans also continued changing. Fish slowly became more diverse. Some developed jaws, making it easier to catch food. Others gained stronger fins and better swimming abilities. Coral communities supported many different animals. Shellfish, worms, and other sea creatures filled many parts of the oceans. These marine ecosystems became increasingly complex over long periods. Some fish developed stronger fins that allowed them to move through shallow water more effectively. In wetlands, where water levels changed during different seasons, these abilities became useful. Over many generations, certain fish developed features that later helped some descendants move onto land. These changes happened through countless small steps rather than sudden transformations. The land itself became greener as plant life continued spreading. Moss-like plants were joined by taller species with simple stems. Later, plants with vascular tissues carried water and nutrients more efficiently. These plants could grow much larger than earlier forms. Their success changed landscapes across many regions of the world. Dead plants accumulated in wetlands where water slowed decomposition. Thick layers of plant material built up year after year. In some places, these layers later became peat and eventually formed coal after being buried, compressed, and heated deep within the earth over millions of years. These ancient coal deposits provide important evidence about the environments that existed before giant insects became common. The growing plant life also influenced the atmosphere. Plants absorbed carbon dioxide while producing oxygen. As forests became larger, this process affected the balance of gases in the air. Although many factors influenced atmospheric composition, expanding vegetation played a major role in shaping conditions that later supported different forms of animal life. Although many factors influenced atmospheric composition, expanding vegetation played a major role in shaping conditions that later supported different forms of animal life. Early insects had not yet become the dominant animals of the land. Their ancestors were still developing important features that would later allow them to spread into many different environments. Wings had not yet appeared in the earliest forms. Flight would evolve much later, opening entirely new opportunities for feeding, escaping danger, finding mates, and spreading into new habitats. Many wetlands covered parts of the continents. Rivers often overflowed their banks, creating marshes and shallow pools. These wet environments supported rich plant growth. Fallen branches, decaying leaves, fungi, and moist soil created ideal places for small arthropods and other simple land animals to live. These habitats would later become important centers for insect evolution. The Earth's continents continued their slow movement. New mountain ranges formed while older ones wore away through erosion. Sea levels rose and fell as climates changed, and tectonic forces reshaped ocean basins. Coastlines moved inland and then back toward the sea over millions of years. Every change created new environments where living things either adapted or disappeared. The world before giant insects appeared was already full of ongoing change. The air, land, oceans, climate, plants, and animals all continued developing through natural processes that unfolded across vast stretches of time. The conditions that later allowed giant insects to appear were slowly taking shape as forests expanded. Oxygen levels continued changing, and early arthropods became more successful across the growing landscapes. The Carboniferous period began about 359 million years ago and lasted until about 299 million years ago. It was one of the most important periods in the history of Earth because many changes took place across the land, the oceans, and the atmosphere. During this long stretch of time, huge forests spread across many parts of the world. The air contained much more oxygen than it does today, and many kinds of living things became larger and more successful. Among the most famous animals of this period were the gigantic insects that lived in the forests, swamps, rivers, and wetlands. Their large size has amazed scientists and nature lovers for many years, because insects living today are much smaller. The Carboniferous period created the right conditions for these animals to grow to sizes that are almost impossible to imagine when looking at modern insects. At the beginning of the Carboniferous period, the continents were slowly moving across Earth's surface because of the movement of large plates beneath them. Many land areas were located close to the equator, where the climate stayed warm and received plenty of rain. Large rivers carried water across the land, filling wide, low areas that became wetlands and swamps. These places remained wet for long periods because the rainfall was heavy and the ground was often flat. Thick layers of plants grew almost everywhere in these wetlands, creating some of the largest forests that had ever existed. The forests of the Carboniferous period looked very different from forests today. Flowering plants had not yet appeared. Instead, giant club mosses, horsetails, ferns, seed ferns, and early trees covered the land. Some club mosses reached heights of more than 100 feet. Giant horsetails also grew to impressive heights. Ferns spread across the forest floor and filled open spaces with thick green leaves. These plants formed dense forests that blocked much of the sunlight from reaching the ground below. Fallen leaves, broken branches, and dead plants collected in the wet soil where they slowly built up into thick layers. The wet ground of these forests slowed the decay of dead plants. Instead of completely breaking down, large amounts of plant material remained buried beneath water and mud. Over millions of years, heat and pressure changed these buried plants into coal. This process gave the Carboniferous period its name because the rocks formed during this time contain enormous amounts of carbon stored inside coal. Many of the coal deposits used by people today were formed during this ancient period. The atmosphere during the Carboniferous period was also different from the atmosphere of the present day. Scientists believe that oxygen made up about 35% of the air during parts of this period. Today, oxygen makes up only about 21% of the atmosphere. The large forests produced huge amounts of oxygen through photosynthesis. At the same time, much of the carbon from dead plants became buried instead of returning to the atmosphere. This allowed oxygen levels to rise over a very long time. The high amount of oxygen had an important effect on insects. Unlike mammals, birds, and reptiles, insects do not breathe with lungs. Instead, they take in air through tiny openings along the sides of their bodies. These openings connect to a network of small tubes called tracheae. Oxygen moves through these tubes and reaches the insect's tissues. This breathing system works well for small bodies, but becomes less effective as body size increases. During the Carboniferous period, the extra oxygen in the air made it easier for insects to deliver enough oxygen throughout their bodies. This helped some species grow much larger than insects living today. The absence of flying birds also played an important part in the success of giant insects. Birds had not yet evolved, and no fast-flying hunters filled the skies. This meant that large flying insects faced fewer dangers while searching for food or mates. Although other animals hunted insects, the skies were far less crowded with skilled hunters than they would become many millions of years later. One of the most famous insects of the Carboniferous period was Meganeura. This ancient relative of modern dragonflies had a wingspan that reached about 2½ feet. It was one of the largest flying insects known to science. Meganeura had a long body, strong wings and large eyes that helped it find prey. It flew above rivers, lakes and swamps where many smaller animals lived. It hunted other insects and small creatures using powerful legs covered with sharp spines. Once it caught its prey, it used strong mouthparts to eat it. Meganeura depended on excellent eyesight. Its large compound eyes were made of thousands of tiny lenses that worked together to detect movement. This helped it notice prey while flying. Fast flight and quick changes in direction allowed it to catch animals that tried to escape. Scientists believe that Meganeura spent much of its life near fresh water, because its young probably developed in water before becoming adults. The young forms of dragonfly relatives looked different from the adults. They lived beneath the water, where they hunted small animals. As they grew larger, they shed their outer covering many times. Eventually they climbed onto plants, rising above the water. Their final outer covering split open, allowing the adult insect to emerge with soft wings that slowly became stronger. After resting for a short time, the new adult flew away into the surrounding forest. Meganeura was not the only giant insect living during this period. Another remarkable animal was Arthropleura. Although it was not an insect, it was a close relative belonging to the group that includes millipedes. Arthropleura became one of the largest land animals without a backbone that has ever lived. Some individuals grew longer than 8 feet. Its body consisted of many connected sections protected by a hard outer covering. Numerous legs carried it across the forest floor. Scientists believe that Arthropleura probably fed mostly on dead plant material, fallen leaves, and other plant remains. fossil trackways show that it moved across soft ground and through muddy forests. It likely spent much of its time searching for food among thick layers of decaying vegetation. Because the forests produced huge amounts of plant material, food was plentiful. Many other insects also reached unusual sizes. Giant mayflies flew above rivers and lakes. Early cockroaches became common throughout the forests. Large relatives of grasshoppers, crickets, and other insects appeared. Different kinds of beetle ancestors also began to spread. Some insects fed on plants, while others hunted smaller animals or cleaned up dead material lying on the forest floor. The Carboniferous forests supported an enormous variety of life. Because different environments existed within a relatively small area. Tall trees formed the upper part of the forest. Thick leaves blocked much of the sunlight. Lower plants covered the damp ground. Pools of water, streams, fallen logs, and muddy banks created many places where animals could live. Each part of the forest offered food and shelter for different species. The climate remained warm across many regions during much of the Carboniferous period. Heavy rainfall kept rivers full and wetlands healthy. The thick forests helped hold moisture in the soil. Water slowly moved through the landscape, creating conditions that favored the growth of plants. Since insects depended on plants directly or indirectly for food, these forests supported large insect populations. Reproduction allowed insect populations to grow quickly. Many insects laid large numbers of eggs. The young often developed rapidly when food was plentiful. Different life stages reduced competition because young and adults sometimes ate different foods or lived in different places. This increased the chances that more individuals would survive. The hard outer covering of insects provided important protection. This covering supported the body, reduced water loss, and gave muscles a firm surface for movement. Strong legs allowed many species to climb plants, dig into soft ground, or capture prey. Wings opened new opportunities by allowing insects to travel long distances, escape danger, and search for mates. Not all animals during the Carboniferous period were insects. Early amphibians became very successful and lived beside rivers, ponds, and swamps. Some reached large sizes and hunted fish or smaller land animals. The first true reptiles also appeared during this period. Unlike amphibians, reptiles laid eggs with protective coverings that allowed them to reproduce away from water. This important change helped reptiles spread into new environments. Spiders, scorpions, and other relatives of modern arachnids also lived in the forests. Some hunted insects while hiding beneath plants or inside fallen logs. Others waited quietly for prey to approach. Their presence added another level of activity to the Carboniferous ecosystem where every habitat supported many forms of life. The oceans during the Carboniferous period were filled with fish, sharks, shellfish, and many other sea animals. Coral communities grew in warm, shallow waters. Crinoids covered parts of the sea floor, filtering tiny food particles from the water. Although the giant insects lived mainly on land, the health of the oceans remained connected to the overall climate and environment of the planet. Seasonal changes affected different regions even though much of the world remained warm. Some areas experienced periods of flooding followed by lower water levels. Rivers changed their paths across the landscape, creating new wetlands while leaving older ones behind. Forests slowly expanded into these fresh habitats, bringing insects and other animals with them. Fossils provide most of what scientists know about Carboniferous insects. Their remains have been discovered in rocks formed from ancient riverbeds, lake deposits, and swamp sediments. Some fossils preserve wings with detailed patterns of veins. Others preserve complete bodies showing legs, eyes, mouthparts, and body segments. even footprints and trackways reveal how some animals moved across the ground. Scientists carefully study these fossils using modern technology. High-quality photographs, detailed measurements, and scanning equipment help reveal structures that cannot easily be seen with the human eye. By comparing fossils from different places, researchers learn how species spread across ancient continents and how they changed over time. The discovery of giant insect fossils surprised many early scientists because living insects rarely reach such sizes. As more fossils were uncovered, evidence continued to show that these large animals truly existed. Complete fossil wings of Meganeura, large body sections of Arthropleura, and other remains confirmed that the Carboniferous world supported animals much larger than their modern relatives. Scientists continue to study why insect size later decreased. One important reason was the gradual drop in oxygen levels after the Carboniferous period ended. Climate changes, shifting forests, and the appearance of new predators also affected insect evolution. As ecosystems changed, extremely large insects became less common, while smaller forms proved better suited to the new conditions. The Carboniferous period also experienced important geological changes. Mountains formed as continents slowly moved and collided. These events changed rainfall patterns, river systems, and local climates. Some wetlands disappeared while new ones formed elsewhere. Over millions of years, these changing landscapes influenced where plants and animals could survive. The forests absorbed large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. When dead plants became buried instead of fully decaying, much of that carbon remained locked beneath the ground. This process influenced Earth's climate over long periods. The stored plant material eventually became thick coal layers that would remain buried until humans began mining them millions of years later. Different plant species filled different parts of the forests. Club mosses often dominated wetter areas, while seed ferns spread across slightly drier ground. Giant horsetails grew beside streams and ponds. Thick roots helped stabilize the muddy soil, while dense leaves created shaded areas that stayed cool and moist. These conditions supported insects that preferred damp environments. Many insects depended directly on plants for food. Some chewed leaves, stems, or spores. Others fed on decaying plant material that collected on the forest floor. Predatory insects depended on these plant-eating species for survival. This created a complex food network that allowed many different species to exist within the same forest. Even after millions of years, the rocks formed during the Carboniferous period continue to provide valuable information about ancient life. Each fossil adds another piece to the story of Earth's distant past, revealing the remarkable world in which gigantic insects lived and thrived. Earth's air has not always been the same. The mixture of gases that surrounds the planet has changed many times during Earth's long history. There were periods when the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere was much lower than it is today, and there were also periods when oxygen became much higher than its present level. One of the most important of these times took place during the Carboniferous period. During this part of Earth's history, oxygen reached one of the highest levels ever known. Scientists believed that the atmosphere contained around 35% oxygen, much more than the almost 21% found in the air today. This higher amount of oxygen had a powerful effect on plants, animals, insects, forests, rivers, swamps, and many natural processes that shaped life across the land. The story of this increase in oxygen began long before the Carboniferous period. For countless millions of years, the Earth slowly changed. As volcanoes released gases into the atmosphere, oceans formed, continents moved, and simple forms of life appeared. The earliest atmosphere had almost no oxygen that animals could breathe. Instead, it was filled with gases released from deep inside the planet. Over time, tiny living organisms developed the ability to use sunlight to make food. These organisms released oxygen as a natural part of this process. At first, this oxygen did not remain in the atmosphere because it reacted with iron and many other materials found in the oceans and on land. Large amounts of oxygen were used up in these chemical reactions before it could collect in the air. As more and more of these tiny organisms continued producing oxygen, the materials that absorbed oxygen slowly became filled. After many millions of years, oxygen finally began building up in the atmosphere. This was not a quick event. It happened very slowly over an extremely long period of Earth's history. Each generation of tiny organisms added a little more oxygen than the one before. Gradually, the atmosphere became richer in oxygen, making it possible for more complex forms of life to appear. By the time the Carboniferous period arrived, plants had already spread across much of the land. Earlier plants were small and simple, but over time they became larger and more complex. Roots became stronger, stems became taller, and leaves became better at collecting sunlight. Plants covered wide areas that had once been bare ground. Thick forests spread across many parts of the continents, especially in warm and wet regions where rain fell often, and rivers carried fresh water across the land. The climate during much of the Carboniferous period helped these forests grow. Many areas were warm, moist, and filled with shallow water. Huge swamps developed across large regions. These swamps stayed wet for long periods because water moved slowly through them. The soil remained soft and dead plants often fell into standing water instead of drying out in the open air. Trees grew close together, creating forests that stretched across great distances. Ferns, giant club mosses, horsetails, seed ferns, and many other ancient plants filled these wetlands with thick layers of green leaves and tall trunks. Plants use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make food through the process known as photosynthesis. During this process, plants remove carbon dioxide from the air and release oxygen. Every leaf that carried out photosynthesis added a small amount of oxygen to the atmosphere. One plant alone could not change the air, but forests covering enormous areas of land could produce vast amounts of oxygen every day. As these forests continued growing year after year, they released increasing amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere. The amount of oxygen in the air depends not only on how much oxygen is produced, but also on how much oxygen is removed. Oxygen can disappear through many natural processes. Dead plants and animals usually decay. Tiny organisms such as bacteria and fungi break down dead material. During this process, oxygen is used. Fire also consumes oxygen. Chemical reactions involving rocks and minerals remove oxygen as well. The balance between oxygen being added and oxygen being removed determines how much oxygen remains in the atmosphere. During the Carboniferous period, an unusual balance developed. Plants produced oxygen at a very high rate because forests covered huge areas of land. At the same time, large amounts of dead plant material did not fully decay. Instead of being completely broken down by bacteria and fungi, much of this plant matter became buried under mud, sand, and water. Since it remained buried, the carbon stored inside the plants stayed locked underground instead of returning to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. This burial of plant material was one of the most important reasons oxygen continued rising. When plants make food, they remove carbon dioxide from the air and release oxygen. If the plants later rot completely, much of that oxygen is used again as the carbon returns to the atmosphere. However, when dead plants become buried before complete decay takes place, the carbon remains trapped underground. The oxygen that was released during plant growth stays in the atmosphere instead of being used up again. The Carboniferous forests created enormous amounts of plant material every year. Leaves fell into swamps, branches broke from trees. Whole trees sometimes collapsed into muddy water after storms or floods. Thick layers of dead plants collected on the wet ground. Since the swamps often lacked enough oxygen beneath the surface, bacteria could not easily break down all this material. Decay became much slower than it would have been on dry land. As fresh layers of plants continued falling, older layers became buried deeper beneath the surface. Pressure slowly increased as more material collected above them. Mud and sand covered these layers again and again. Over very long periods, the buried plant material changed. Heat and pressure slowly transformed it into thick layers of coal. Many of the coal deposits mined today were formed from these ancient Carboniferous forests. Coal formation played an important part in keeping oxygen levels high. Every layer of coal represented carbon that had been removed from the atmosphere for an extremely long time. Since this carbon remained underground, instead of returning to the air, oxygen continued building up. Scientists studying ancient rocks have found evidence showing that coal deposits from this period are among the largest ever formed during Earth's history. Another important reason for high oxygen levels involved the organisms responsible for breaking down wood. Today, fungi are highly effective at decomposing wood. They quickly recycle dead trees back into the environment. During much of the Carboniferous period, however, many scientists believed that the organisms able to fully digest the tough material known as lignin were not yet widespread or were less efficient than they became later. Lignin gives wood its strength and hardness. Because fewer organisms could completely break it down, large amounts of wood remained preserved instead of quickly decaying. The slow breakdown of wood meant that forests continued storing carbon underground. Dead trunks remained in swamps for long periods. Many became buried before complete decay could occur. This further increased the amount of carbon removed from the atmosphere and allowed oxygen to remain at high levels. The movement of the continents also helped create conditions that favored widespread forests. During the Carboniferous period, many land areas were located near the equator. These regions received plenty of sunlight and regular rainfall. Rivers spread across broad plains, creating extensive wetlands. The warm temperatures encouraged rapid plant growth throughout much of the year. Large forests could continue producing oxygen over long periods without severe interruptions. Sea levels also changed during different parts of the Carboniferous period. In many places, shallow seas moved across the land and later withdrew again. These changing water levels created fresh wetlands where plants quickly spread. Each new swamp became another place where large amounts of plant material could grow, die, and eventually become buried. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere also changed over time. As forests expanded, plants removed enormous amounts of carbon dioxide from the air. Lower carbon dioxide levels affected Earth's climate in different ways, but the important point for oxygen is that the process of photosynthesis continued transferring carbon from the atmosphere into plant tissues while releasing oxygen into the air. Scientists learn about ancient oxygen levels using several kinds of evidence. They cannot directly measure the atmosphere from hundreds of millions of years ago, but they study clues preserved in rocks, fossils, and chemical records. Ancient soils contain minerals that formed under different oxygen conditions. The chemistry of certain rocks records changes in the atmosphere over time. Coal deposits show how much plant material was buried. Fossil charcoal provides evidence that fires occurred under oxygen-rich conditions because fires become easier to start and spread when oxygen levels are high. Scientists also examine tiny bubbles trapped in ancient materials, study the chemical forms of sulfur and carbon preserved in rocks, and use computer models that combine information from geology, chemistry, biology, and climate. These different methods often support the idea that oxygen reached very high levels during the Carboniferous period. High oxygen affected many living organisms. Animals that breathed air had access to more oxygen with every breath. Cells could receive oxygen more easily. Some groups of animals benefited from these conditions in ways that influenced their growth, activity, and survival. Insects were among the creatures most strongly affected because their breathing system differs from that of mammals and birds. Insects breathe through tiny openings along the sides of their bodies called spiracles. Air enters these openings and travels through a network of tubes that carry oxygen directly to body tissues. This system works well for small insects, but becomes less effective as body size increases, because oxygen must travel longer distances through these tubes. When the atmosphere contains more oxygen, the gas can move more easily through the breathing tubes, allowing insects to grow larger than they usually could under lower oxygen conditions. This helped support some of the largest insects known from Earth's history. Giant dragonfly relatives, enormous millipedes, large cockroach relatives, and other invertebrates lived during or near this period. High oxygen was not the only reason they became large, but it was an important factor that made such growth possible. Plants also responded to the conditions around them. Rich sunlight, plentiful water, and favorable temperatures allowed forests to continue expanding. Every growing season added fresh leaves, stems, roots, and trunks. As old plants died, new plants replaced them. This steady cycle maintained high rates of photosynthesis across vast landscapes. The wetlands themselves became places where organic material collected year after year. Water slowed the movement of oxygen into the soil, making it harder for many organisms responsible for decay to survive deep below the surface. Dead plants remained preserved much longer than they would have in dry forests. This preserved carbon continued contributing to the rise in atmospheric oxygen. Large rivers flowing through these regions regularly carried sediments into the swamps. These sediments buried fallen plants beneath fresh layers of mud. Each burial event protected more plant material from complete decay. Over immense periods of time, repeated burial created thick sequences of coal-bearing rocks that remain visible in many parts of the world today. The atmosphere did not reach high oxygen levels overnight. The increase happened gradually over millions of years. Each generation of forests added more oxygen than was removed because so much carbon became locked beneath the ground. This slow but steady process eventually produced one of the highest oxygen concentrations in Earth's history. As oxygen continued increasing, natural fires also became more common in some places because higher oxygen makes plant material easier to burn. Evidence of ancient charcoal preserved in rocks shows that fires occurred in Carboniferous forests. Even after fires, plants often returned and continued growing, beginning the cycle once again. Fresh forests absorbed carbon dioxide, released oxygen, and produced new layers of plant material that later became buried. Different groups of plants contributed in different ways. Giant club mosses formed thick forests in many wetlands. Horsetails reached impressive heights in suitable environments. Ferns spread across moist ground, while seed ferns added further plant diversity. Each group carried out photosynthesis, adding oxygen to the atmosphere while storing carbon inside roots, stems, and leaves. Their combined growth over millions of years created an enormous biological system that continuously influenced the composition of Earth's atmosphere. The oceans also played a role because marine plants and microscopic organisms continued producing oxygen through photosynthesis. Although the Carboniferous forests on land were especially important for oxygen buildup, life in the oceans remained another steady source of oxygen production. Together, land plants and marine organisms contributed to the gradual increase that shaped the atmosphere during this remarkable period. Around 320 million years ago, Earth was a very different place from the world we know today. The land was covered by vast forests filled with giant club mosses, tall horsetails, seed ferns, and many other ancient plants that no longer dominate the planet. Warm temperatures and high levels of moisture allowed these forests to spread across large areas. Rivers slowly crossed the land, wide swamps covered low places, and thick layers of fallen leaves and dead plants collected on the ground. These ancient forests would later become the coal deposits that people use today. Among the trees and plants lived many kinds of early animals. Amphibians were common near water. Reptiles were beginning to spread. Spiders hunted among the leaves. Millipedes crawled across the forest floor, and insects filled the air and vegetation. During this time, some insects reached sizes that seem surprising today. Their appearance was the result of a very long process of evolution that had started hundreds of millions of years earlier. The story of the first giant flying insects began long before these enormous insects appeared. It started with the earliest ancestors of insects that lived in ancient seas before animals had fully settled on land. Scientists believe that insects belong to a larger group of animals called arthropods. Arthropods have hard outer coverings called exoskeletons, bodies divided into sections, and jointed legs. Long before insects evolved, many kinds of arthropods already lived in the oceans. Some were small enough to be difficult to see without careful study, while others became much larger. Over many millions of years, different groups developed new body forms and new ways of living. Some remained in the water, while others slowly adapted to life on land. The movement from water to land was not easy. Animals needed ways to keep their bodies from drying out. They also needed stronger legs to support themselves outside water. They needed ways to breathe air instead of taking oxygen from water. Early land arthropods gradually developed these features through many generations. Their hard outer coverings helped reduce water loss. Their jointed legs became stronger and better suited for walking across rocks, mud, fallen leaves, and soil. Their breathing systems changed so that air could enter tiny openings on the body and move through tubes that carried oxygen directly to body tissues. Among these early land arthropods were ancestors that eventually gave rise to insects. These early insects were very different from the insects seen today. They had simple body structures and lacked many features found in later species. They lived close to the ground, hiding under dead plants, inside cracks, or among damp soil. Their food included tiny pieces of plant material, fungi, and other organic matter. Some also fed on small living organisms. Their small size helped them survive because they needed fewer resources and could easily hide from predators. As plants spread farther across the land, insects found more places to live. Every new type of plant created fresh opportunities. Leaves provided food, stems offered shelter. Dead wood created hiding places. Wet soil beneath thick vegetation remained cool and moist. These conditions allowed insect populations to grow. different groups slowly developed special features that allowed them to survive in different environments. Some became better at digging, others became better climbers. Some improved their mouth parts so they could feed on different foods. Over long periods, these changes led to many new kinds of insects. One of the most important developments in insect history was the evolution of wings. Scientists continue to study exactly how wings first appeared, because the earliest stages are not fully preserved in fossils. Different ideas have been suggested. Some researchers believe that wings developed from flat extensions on the body that originally helped insects control their movement while jumping or falling. Others think wings may have evolved from structures connected with breathing or from parts that originally served another purpose before gradually becoming useful for flight. Whatever the exact path, wings became one of the greatest changes in insect evolution. The earliest wings probably could not support strong flight. They may have helped insects glide short distances or control their landing after falling from plants. Even this limited ability would have been valuable. It allowed insects to move between branches more safely. It helped them escape danger. It reduced the chance of falling directly to the ground where predators waited. Natural selection favored individuals whose wings worked slightly better. Over countless generations, wings became larger, stronger, and more effective. As flight improved, insects entered parts of the environment that had previously been difficult to reach. They could travel over streams, move between distant plants, and search for mates across wider areas. Flying also helped insects find new food sources and escape enemies more quickly. Groups that developed efficient flight spread into many habitats. They continued to evolve in different directions, giving rise to many kinds of flying insects. The atmosphere during the late Paleozoic era played an important part in the lives of these insects. During the Carboniferous period, the amount of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere was much higher than it is today. Scientists believe this happened because huge forests covered vast areas of land. Plants removed large amounts of carbon dioxide from the air during photosynthesis and released oxygen. Dead plant material often collected in wet swamps where it did not completely decay. Large amounts of carbon remained buried in the ground, allowing oxygen levels to stay unusually high for a very long time. High oxygen levels affected many living things. Insects breathe through a system of tiny openings called spiracles and a network of tubes known as tracheae. Oxygen moves directly through these tubes into the body's tissues. This system works very well for small animals, but it becomes less efficient as body size increases. When the atmosphere contained more oxygen, it became easier for oxygen to reach deeper parts of larger insect bodies. This made it possible for some insects to grow much larger than insects living today. The increase in oxygen alone did not create giant insects. Evolution required many factors working together. Large forests provided abundant food and shelter. Wet conditions reduced the danger of drying out. Many areas contained rich plant life throughout the year. Predators capable of catching large flying insects were still limited because birds had not yet evolved. Flying reptiles would not appear until much later. These conditions allowed large flying insects to survive and reproduce successfully over many generations. The ancestors of giant flying insects slowly became larger through natural selection. Within each generation, individuals varied slightly in size, strength, wing shape, and other features. Some differences helped survival. Larger wings allowed longer flights. Stronger flight muscles supported heavier bodies. Better eyesight improved hunting success. Individuals with useful traits often produced more offspring, passing these characteristics to later generations. Across countless generations, these small changes accumulated until some species became remarkably large. One of the most famous giant flying insects belongs to a group known as griffin flies. These insects are often mistaken for modern dragonflies because they looked similar in several ways. However, they belong to a different group that is now completely extinct. Some species reached wingspans of more than 2 feet. Their long bodies, wide wings, and large eyes made them skilled hunters of the ancient skies. Griffin flies possess 2 pairs of strong wings attached to the middle part of the body. Their wings contain networks of veins that provided support while remaining light enough for flight. Each pair of wings could move with a high degree of control. This allowed precise movement through the air. They could change direction quickly, rise, descend, and remain almost motionless for short periods while searching for prey. Their heads were dominated by enormous compound eyes made from thousands of tiny lenses. Each lens captured part of the surrounding view. Together, these lenses created a wide field of vision that helped detect movement. Good eyesight was essential because griffin flies hunted other insects while flying. They needed to judge speed, distance, and direction accurately. Their mouthparts were adapted for catching and eating animal prey. Strong jaws crushed the bodies of smaller insects. Their legs helped seize prey during flight or while resting on branches and stems. Sharp spines on the legs improved their grip. Once prey was caught, powerful mouthparts quickly broke it into smaller pieces that could be eaten. The muscles that powered flight occupied much of the middle body section. These muscles worked together with the wings to produce rapid movement through the air. Flying required large amounts of energy, and the abundant insect life found in carboniferous forests supplied the food needed to support active hunters. The forests themselves formed a complex environment filled with countless opportunities for flying insects. Tall plants created many layers of vegetation. Sunlight reached the upper leaves while the lower areas remained darker and wetter. Streams, ponds, and swamps added more habitats. Flying insects moved through these spaces in search of food, mates, and suitable places to lay eggs. The life cycle of many ancient flying insects probably shared important features with modern dragonflies and related groups, although some details remain uncertain because complete fossils showing every stage are rare. Eggs were likely placed near water or damp environments. Young stages lived under conditions that supported their growth before changing into winged adults. As they matured, their bodies developed stronger muscles, larger eyes, and fully formed wings capable of sustained flight. Fossils provide much of what scientists know about these ancient insects. Most fossils formed when dead insects became buried in fine mud or sediment before their bodies completely decayed. Over long periods, minerals replaced or preserved delicate structures. Some fossils show wings with remarkable detail, allowing scientists to study vein patterns that identify different species. Other fossils preserve body shape, mouthparts, legs, and even traces of muscles. Ancient rocks containing insect fossils have been discovered in many parts of the world. Each discovery adds new information about the diversity of early flying insects. Some fossils belong to very small species, while others represent giant forms. Together they reveal that insect evolution produced a wide range of body sizes and lifestyles during the Carboniferous and the early Permian period. The study of fossil insects requires careful work. Researchers often examine specimens under powerful microscopes. They photograph tiny details and compare wing patterns with those of known species. Modern imaging methods allow scientists to see structures hidden inside rocks without damaging valuable fossils. These techniques continue to improve understanding of how ancient insects lived and evolved. During the Carboniferous period, many insect groups were experimenting with different body forms. Some specialized in feeding on plants, others hunted smaller animals, some remained close to water, while others spent more time in forest canopies. Flight allowed these insects to spread across wide areas and occupy habitats that ground-dwelling animals could not easily reach. Natural selection continued shaping every part of their bodies. Wing veins became arranged in ways that improved strength while keeping wings light. Legs changed according to feeding habits and movement. Sensory organs became more effective at detecting food, danger, and potential mates. Body colors may also have evolved for protection or communication, although fossil evidence rarely preserves original coloration. As giant flying insects spread across ancient forests, they became important predators within their ecosystems. They helped control populations of smaller insects and other tiny animals. At the same time, they also served as food for larger amphibians and early reptiles whenever opportunities arose. Their presence formed part of the complex network of life that existed across the swamp forests of the late Paleozoic world. The continued evolution of these insects depended on many environmental conditions remaining favorable. High oxygen levels, widespread forests, warm climates, and abundant wetlands supported their success across millions of years. Their bodies reflected the conditions of the world in which they lived, and every generation carried forward small inherited changes that slowly shaped the remarkable, giant, flying insects known from the fossil record. Long before humans appeared, the Earth was home to many forms of life that looked very different from the animals living today. One of the most remarkable of these ancient creatures was Meganeura. This giant flying insect lived during the Carboniferous period, a time when the land was covered by vast forests filled with tall plants, huge ferns, giant club mosses, horsetails, and many other kinds of vegetation. The air, the climate, and the living environment were different from those of the present day. These conditions allowed insects to grow to sizes that would seem surprising today. Meganeura became one of the largest flying insects known to have lived on Earth, and its remains continue to help scientists understand the distant past. Meganeura lived about 300 million years ago during the late Carboniferous period. Fossils discovered in Europe have provided important information about this ancient insect. Most of the known fossils have been found in what is now France and England. These fossils include parts of the wings, body, and other features that have allowed scientists to study its appearance and way of life. Although complete fossils are rare, the preserved remains have revealed enough details to create a clear picture of this giant insect. The name Meganeura means large veins. This name comes from the network of veins that spread across its wings. Like modern dragonflies, its wings contained many strong veins that supported the thin wing surface. These veins helped keep the wings firm during flight. The pattern of the veins is one of the main reasons scientists were able to recognize Meganeura as a separate kind of prehistoric insect. The wing veins also helped experts understand how it may have flown and how it was related to other ancient insects. Meganeura had an enormous wingspan that reached about 70 centimeters. Some fossils suggest that certain individuals may have had wings that stretched even farther. This made it one of the largest flying insects ever known. Each wing was long, wide, and carefully shaped for movement through the air. The wings were transparent, just like those of many insects living today. They were supported by a strong framework of veins that helped prevent damage during flight. Its body was long and narrow. The head was large and carried a pair of huge compound eyes. Each compound eye was made up of thousands of tiny lenses. These lenses worked together to give the insect a broad field of vision. Good eyesight was important because Meganeura depended on finding prey while flying. Large eyes allowed it to notice movement from many directions. This ability helped it locate food and avoid danger. Meganeura also had short antennae. Unlike many insects that depend heavily on long antennae for sensing their surroundings, this giant insect relied mainly on its eyesight. Its mouth contained strong jaws that were designed for catching and eating other animals. These jaws could hold struggling prey firmly while pieces were bitten away and swallowed. The jaws were well suited for a hunting lifestyle. Its legs were covered with small spines. These spines helped trap prey during flight. When Meganeura flew towards another insect, it could use its legs to seize the victim before bringing it to its mouth. The legs also helped it hold onto branches and other resting places. Although the legs were useful for gripping surfaces, they were not built for long walks across the ground. Meganeura spent much of its active life in the air or resting on plants. The muscles inside its body powered the movement of the wings. Flying required a great deal of energy, especially for such a large insect. Strong muscles attached to the inside of the body allowed the wings to beat in a controlled way. This gave Meganeura the ability to move through the forests while searching for prey. The exact speed of its flight is still uncertain, because living examples no longer exist. But scientists believe it was an active flyer that depended on movement through the air for survival. The forests of the Carboniferous period provided an ideal home for Meganeura. Large swampy forests covered much of the land. The ground was often wet and many rivers, ponds and marshes were present. Thick plant growth created many places where insects could hide, feed and reproduce. Fallen trees, decaying plants and standing water supported a rich variety of life. Countless insects lived among the leaves, stems and water, providing an abundant food supply for hunters like Meganeura. The climate during this period was generally warm and humid. Rainfall supported the growth of enormous forests that stretched across wide regions. Plant life was rich and diverse. Giant club mosses reached great heights. Tree ferns spread their large leaves over the forest floor. Horsetails formed dense groups near wetlands. Seed ferns added to the variety of plants that covered the land. These forests produced large amounts of plant material that later became coal after being buried and changed over long periods of time. The air during the Carboniferous period contained more oxygen than it does today. Scientists believe that oxygen levels reached about 35% of the atmosphere. Today, oxygen makes up about 21% of the air. The higher amount of oxygen played an important part in the lives of insects. Insects breathe through tiny openings in the sides of their bodies called spiracles. Air enters these openings and moves through a network of tubes that carry oxygen directly to body tissues. Since insects do not have lungs, this system works best when oxygen is readily available. The greater amount of oxygen in the atmosphere helped larger insects receive enough oxygen to support their bodies. The rich forests also provided protection from many dangers. Thick vegetation offered resting places where Meganeura could remain hidden between hunting trips. Tall plants created sheltered spaces away from strong winds. Water sources attracted many smaller insects, giving Meganeura many opportunities to feed throughout the day. Meganeura was a predator. It hunted other insects that shared the forests and wetlands. Many kinds of ancient insects lived during the Carboniferous period. Some were relatives of mayflies, while others belonged to groups that no longer exist today. Cockroach relatives, early grasshopper relatives, and many winged insects filled the forests. Smaller flying insects formed an important part of Meganeura's diet. When searching for food, Meganeura likely flew over ponds, streams, marshes and open spaces within the forest. Its large eyes constantly watched for movement. Once it noticed prey, it could quickly change direction and move toward its target. The spiny legs reached forward to trap the insect before it escaped. The prey was then held securely while the strong jaws tore it into smaller pieces. Scientists believe that Meganeura probably hunted during daylight because its large compound eyes would have been most useful when light was available. Good vision helped it judge distance, direction, and speed while flying. Clear eyesight also reduced the chance of missing prey or striking objects during flight. Although Meganeura was a powerful hunter among insects, it also lived in a world filled with other animals. Early amphibians were common in wetlands and rivers. Some reptiles had already appeared and were beginning to spread across different environments. Large spiders, giant millipedes, and other arthropods also lived in the forests. Each species occupied its own place within the living community of the Carboniferous world. The life cycle of Meganeura probably shared many features with that of modern dragonflies, because both belong to closely related groups. Scientists believe that the female laid eggs in or near fresh water. After the eggs hatched, young insects known as nymphs lived underwater. These young forms looked different from the adults. They lacked fully developed wings and spent their time hunting small animals beneath the water surface. The underwater nymphs were also predators. They fed on tiny water animals, insect larvae, and other small creatures. As they grew, they shed their outer covering many times. Each shedding allowed the body to become larger. This process continued until the young insect reached full development. When the time came to become an adult, the fully grown nymph climbed out of the water onto a plant stem, rock, or other solid surface. The outer skin split open and the adult slowly emerged. Its soft wings expanded as body fluids entered them. After the wings hardened and the body became stronger, the adult took its first flight into the forests that surrounded the wetlands. Adult Meganeura probably spent much of its life hunting, avoiding danger, finding mates, and producing the next generation. Males may have defended small hunting areas where food was plentiful. Females may have searched for suitable places to lay eggs in fresh water where the young could develop safely. Much of what scientists know about these stages comes from studying modern dragonflies, together with fossil evidence from prehistoric insects, allowing researchers to build a careful picture of how Meganeura may have lived in its ancient environment. The life cycle of giant insects began in much the same way as the life cycle of many insects that are alive today. Even though these ancient insects lived hundreds of millions of years ago, they still followed a clear pattern of growth from the time they first came into existence until they reached adulthood. Scientists have learned about this process by studying fossils, the bodies of living insects, and the long history of insect evolution. Every fossil that has been discovered adds another small piece to the story of how these remarkable animals lived, grew, found mates, and produced young during a time when Earth looked very different from the world that exists today. Many of the largest insects lived during the Carboniferous period, which began about 359 million years ago and ended about 299 million years ago. During this long stretch of Earth's history, forests spread across huge areas of land. The air contained more oxygen than it does today, and this helped support the growth of insects that reached sizes not seen in the modern world. Giant dragonfly relatives, enormous millipedes, large cockroach relatives, and many other kinds of insects and arthropods lived among thick forests, swamps, rivers, and shallow pools. Every giant insect started its life as an egg. The female carefully chose a place where the eggs would have the best chance of surviving. The exact location depended on the kind of insect. Some insects placed their eggs on plants. Others buried them in soft soil, wet mud, or decaying plant material. Dragonfly relatives most likely laid their eggs in or near fresh water because their young depended on aquatic habitats during the earliest stage of life. The eggs were protected by a strong outer covering that helped keep the growing young safe. This covering also reduced the loss of water and protected the developing insect from harmful conditions in the environment. Inside each egg, a tiny body slowly formed as cells divided and became different parts of the future insect. Legs, eyes, mouthparts, and internal organs developed little by little until the young insect was ready to leave the egg. The time needed for an egg to hatch depended on many conditions. Warm temperatures often helped development move forward. Moisture also played an important part because many insect eggs needed enough water to remain healthy. If the environment became too dry or too cold, development could slow down. Some eggs may have remained inactive for a period until better conditions returned. This allowed the young insects to hatch when food and suitable habitats were available. When the young insect finally emerged from the egg, it entered the next stage of its life. The appearance of the young depended on the type of insect. Some young insects looked somewhat like small adults, although they had no wings and were much smaller. Others looked completely different from the adults they would eventually become. Scientists believe that many giant dragonfly relatives experienced incomplete metamorphosis. This meant that the young, called nymphs, resembled adults in basic body shape, but lived in water and lacked fully developed wings. The young nymphs spent much of their time searching for food. They had to eat often because growing required a great deal of energy. Their bodies became larger over time, but insects could not grow in the same way that mammals or birds do. Their bodies were covered by a hard outer shell called an exoskeleton. This shell gave support and protection, but it could not stretch very much. Because of this, the insect had to shed the old exoskeleton whenever it became too tight. This process is known as molting. Molting happened many times during an insect's life. Before a molt, the insect formed a new, soft exoskeleton beneath the old one. After the new covering was ready, the old shell split open. The insect slowly pulled itself free from the old exoskeleton. At first, the new outer covering was soft and flexible. The insect usually remained in a safe place while air entered the body and expanded the new shell. After some time, the exoskeleton became harder and stronger, allowing the insect to continue normal activities. Every molt marked another step in growth. The insect became larger after each shedding of the old shell. Its legs grew longer, its body became stronger, and its internal organs continued to develop. Wing pads gradually became more noticeable in young dragonfly relatives. These small structures slowly expanded through repeated molts until the insect reached adulthood. The period immediately after molting was one of the most dangerous times in an insect's life. Because the new exoskeleton had not yet hardened, the insect could not defend itself as well as usual. It moved carefully and often stayed hidden until its outer covering became firm. During this time, predators could take advantage of its weakness if they discovered it. Young giant dragonfly relatives lived in water for a large part of their lives. Streams, ponds, marshes, and slow-moving rivers provided places where they could hunt and grow. These aquatic nymphs were active predators even before reaching adulthood. They fed on other small animals living in the water, including insect larvae, small crustaceans, worms, tadpoles, and other creatures that could be caught and eaten. The mouthparts of these young predators were well suited for catching prey. Modern dragonfly nymphs have a special lower mouthpart that extends quickly to grab prey, and scientists believe that ancient relatives possessed a similar feeding structure. This allowed them to capture animals with great speed before the prey could escape. As the nymphs grew larger, the size of the prey they could catch also increased. Strong jaws crushed or cut the food into pieces that could be swallowed. Digestion took place inside the body, where nutrients were absorbed and used to build muscles, nerves, wings and other tissues needed for continued growth. Breathing was also important during the growing stage. Aquatic nymphs obtained oxygen from water. Different groups of insects developed different ways of doing this. Some possessed internal structures that absorbed oxygen directly from the surrounding water. As long as the water remained rich in oxygen, these young insects could continue their active lives beneath the surface. Life underwater offered many opportunities, but it also contained many dangers. Larger fish, amphibians, and other aquatic predators searched for food in the same waters. Young giant insects had to avoid becoming prey while hunting for their own meals. Staying still among underwater plants, hiding beneath fallen leaves, or resting on the bottom helped reduce the chance of being noticed. As each molt passed, the body slowly approached its final adult form. Wing pads became larger, muscles became stronger, and the organs needed for reproduction gradually developed. Hormones controlled these changes inside the body. These natural chemical signals directed when molting should occur and when the insect should continue into the next stage of development. The final molt was especially important. At this stage, the insect left behind the last immature exoskeleton and emerged as a fully developed adult. In giant dragonfly relatives, this usually happened after the nymph climbed out of the water onto a plant stem, fallen branch, or rock near the edge of the water. The outer shell split open and the adult slowly pulled itself free. The wings were soft and folded when the adult first appeared. Blood-like fluid moved into the veins of the wings, causing them to expand to their full size. The insect waited while the wings hardened and became ready for flight. This process required patience because flying too early could damage the delicate wings before they became strong enough to support the insect's weight. Once the wings hardened, the adult entered a completely different stage of life. It could now fly through the forests, swamps, and open spaces in search of food and mates. Flight greatly increased the area that the insect could explore. Instead of remaining in one pond or stream, it could travel to many different places during its lifetime. Adult giant dragonfly relatives were skilled hunters. Their large eyes provided wide fields of vision. These eyes were made up of thousands of tiny units that worked together to detect movement. Fast reactions allowed them to chase flying insects through the air. Strong legs formed a basket-like shape during flight that helped trap prey before it reached the powerful jaws. Food remained necessary even after growth was complete. Adult insects needed energy to fly, hunt, avoid predators, and reproduce. A healthy diet increased the chance of successful mating and egg production. Female insects especially needed enough nutrients to produce healthy eggs containing the resources required by developing young. Reproduction began when adult males and females reached sexual maturity. They searched for members of their own species using sight, movement, and sometimes chemical signals. Insects rely on many different methods to recognize suitable mates. Body size, wing movement, color patterns, and behavior all helped males and females identify each other. Courtship behavior varied among different kinds of insects. Some males defended territories where females were likely to appear. Others searched over wide areas until they encountered a potential mate. flying ability played an important part because many meetings happened while insects were moving through the air. Competition between males may also have occurred. A male that successfully reached a female first often had the best chance of passing on his genes to the next generation. Size, strength, flying skill, and good health all increased the likelihood of successful reproduction. During mating, sperm was transferred from the male to the female. The female stored the sperm until her eggs were ready to be fertilized. Fertilization usually happened inside the female's body before the eggs were laid. This protected the developing embryos during their earliest stages. After mating, the female searched carefully for a suitable place to lay her eggs. Choosing the right location was one of the most important parts of reproduction because newly hatched insects depended completely on the environment where they first entered the world. Water quality, available food, protection from predators, and suitable temperatures all affected the survival of the next generation. Some females laid many eggs because only a portion of the young would survive to adulthood. Disease, predators, changing weather, floods, droughts, and lack of food could all reduce the number of young insects that completed their life cycle. Producing many eggs increased the chance that enough offspring would survive to continue the species. The eggs developed quietly, while the adult insects continued their lives. Inside every egg, tiny embryos slowly formed new legs, eyes, muscles, nerves, digestive organs, and other body parts. When development reached the proper stage, the young insects broke through the egg covering and began the cycle once again. As the young insects continued to grow, their bodies became better suited to the conditions around them. Every stage of development brought small but important changes that allowed them to survive more effectively. Their muscles became stronger after each molt, giving them greater control over movement. Their legs became more powerful, allowing them to climb, crawl, swim, or grip plants with greater ease. The mouth parts also became larger and harder, making it possible to feed on a wider range of prey, as their bodies demanded more food to support continued growth. The digestive system also became more efficient throughout development. Food that entered the mouth was broken into smaller pieces before moving through the digestive tract. Enzymes helped separate useful nutrients from the food, allowing the insect to absorb proteins, fats, and other substances needed to build new body tissues. Waste material that could not be used was removed from the body through the digestive system. This constant process of eating, digesting, absorbing nutrients, and removing waste continued throughout the insect's life. The circulatory system supported growth by moving nutrients and oxygen throughout the body. Insects have an open circulatory system rather than one with closed blood vessels like those found in mammals. A tube running along the back of the body acted as the heart. It slowly pumped body fluid through the open spaces inside the insect, carrying nutrients to growing tissues and helping remove waste products. This system worked together with the breathing organs to keep the body functioning during periods of rapid growth. The nervous system also became more developed as the insect matured. The brain and nerve cords controlled movement, feeding, balance, and reactions to danger. Young insects learned through repeated experiences. They did not learn in the same way as humans, but repeated contact with their surroundings helped shape their responses. An insect that successfully escaped a predator or found food in a certain type of habitat was likely to repeat similar actions when faced with the same conditions again. Vision became increasingly important as the insect approached adulthood. The compound eyes continued to develop, adding more visual units that improved the ability to detect movement. Sharp eyesight allowed giant flying insects to notice prey from a distance and react quickly. Detecting even slight movement helped them avoid danger while searching for food. Their simple eyes also helped measure light levels, making it easier to tell the difference between day and night. Other senses played valuable roles during development. Fine hairs covering different parts of the body could detect movement in the air or water. Vibrations caused by approaching animals warned the insect of possible danger before direct contact occurred. Sensitive structures on the antennae allowed the insect to detect chemical signals in its surroundings. These signals helped locate food, identify suitable habitats, and later recognize members of the same species during the breeding season. As giant insects became older, they occupied different parts of their habitats. Very young individuals often remained in sheltered areas where food was plentiful and predators were fewer. Older insects that had become larger and stronger could move into more open spaces, where they had access to greater amounts of food. This gradual change reduced competition among individuals of different ages living in the same area. Seasonal changes also influenced development. During warmer periods, insects often grew more quickly because higher temperatures increased the speed of many body processes. Food was usually more abundant during these times, allowing young insects to eat regularly. Cooler periods slowed growth. Some insects entered a resting stage that reduced their activity until favorable conditions returned. This helped conserve energy when food became scarce or temperatures dropped. Rainfall had a major influence on insects living near water. Healthy ponds, marshes and streams supported rich communities of small animals that served as food for growing nymphs. Heavy rainfall could create new pools and expand existing wetlands, providing additional places for young insects to develop. Long dry periods, however, could reduce available habitat and force many individuals into smaller areas where food became limited. Plants supported the life cycle in many ways, even when the insects did not feed directly on them. Thick vegetation provided shelter from predators and harsh weather. Leaves and stems offered safe places for molting. Dead plant material collected in water created hiding places for young aquatic insects. Plant roots also helped stabilize the edges of streams and ponds, creating suitable environments for eggs and developing nymphs. The quality of the surrounding environment greatly affected survival. Clean water rich in oxygen supported healthy growth for aquatic species. Water filled with decaying material that reduced oxygen levels made survival much more difficult. Young insects that could not obtain enough oxygen became weak and developed more slowly. Those living in cleaner water usually reached adulthood in better condition. Not every insect developed at exactly the same speed. Even individuals from the same group could mature at different times depending on the amount of food they found, the temperatures they experienced, and the dangers they faced. Some reached adulthood earlier because favorable conditions allowed steady growth. Others required much longer because repeated hardships slowed their development. Injuries were another challenge during the growing years. Legs or antennae could be damaged during attacks by predators or accidents while moving through rough surroundings. In young insects, molting sometimes allowed partial replacement of damaged body parts. If a leg was lost early in development, later molts could produce a smaller but usable replacement. This ability became more limited after the insect reached its final adult stage because no further molting occurred. Disease and parasites also affected giant insects. Tiny organisms such as fungi, bacteria, and microscopic parasites likely infected some individuals. Internal parasites may have entered the body through contaminated food or water, while external parasites attached themselves to the outer surface. Healthy insects with enough food often resisted infection more successfully than weak individuals living under difficult conditions. Energy was carefully divided among different body functions. During the early stages of life, most energy supported growth. Building larger muscles, stronger wings, and developing reproductive organs required constant supplies of nutrients. Once adulthood was reached, much of the available energy shifted toward reproduction. Adults still needed food, but producing eggs or sperm became one of the main purposes of the mature stage. The reproductive organs reached full development only after the final molt. In males, structures needed to produce and transfer sperm became fully functional. In females, the ovaries gradually produced mature eggs. These eggs contained stored nutrients that would support the developing embryo during its earliest stages before hatching. Finding a suitable mate often required movement across large areas. Adult giant dragonfly relatives likely spent many hours flying over rivers, ponds and forest clearings where others of their species gathered. Good weather encouraged activity, while heavy rain, strong winds, or unusually cool temperatures reduced opportunities for mating. Many insects depended on timing for successful reproduction. Males and females needed to become adults during the same general period so they could find one another. If one group matured much earlier than the other, opportunities for mating would decrease. Natural selection favored life cycles that kept the breeding season well organized within each species. The condition of the adult also influenced reproductive success. Individuals that had found abundant food during their younger stages usually reached adulthood with stronger bodies and greater energy reserves. Females in good condition often produced larger numbers of healthy eggs. Males with strong flight muscles and good overall health were more likely to locate mates and complete successful breeding. Egg production required a great deal of nourishment. Each developing egg contained materials that would support the embryo after fertilization. The female continued feeding after mating to obtain enough nutrients for egg development. As the eggs matured inside her body, they gradually moved toward the structures used for laying them in suitable locations. The ancient world was filled with constant activity as living creatures searched for food, avoided danger, protected their homes, and struggled to survive from one day to the next. Every part of the land, the water, and the air held animals that depended on other living things for food. Some hunted fresh prey, while others searched for weak, injured, or dead animals. Every day brought new dangers, and every creature had to remain alert. There were no safe places that stayed peaceful for long because the need to eat, grow, and reproduce shaped the lives of all living things. Giant insects, early amphibians, ancient fish, and many other forms of life shared the same world, and each faced different challenges that tested its ability to survive. During the Carboniferous period, the land was covered by wide forests filled with giant club mosses, horsetails, seed ferns, and many other plants. Thick vegetation created dark, damp places where insects and other small animals could hide. Wet ground, slow-moving streams, ponds, and large swampy areas supported countless forms of life. These rich habitats produced plenty of food, but they also attracted hunters. Any place that offered food soon became a place where predators waited for an opportunity to catch prey. Many insects fed on leaves, soft plant tissue, spores, seeds, dead plants, and other natural material. They spent much of their time searching through the forest floor or climbing stems and branches to find fresh food. While feeding, they remained exposed to danger. Hunters often stayed hidden among the plants, waiting until an insect moved close enough to attack. Some predators depended on speed, while others depended on surprise. A single careless movement could place an insect directly in front of a waiting hunter. Large dragonflies such as Meganeura became some of the best-known flying hunters of this time. Their large wings allowed them to travel quickly through the warm air above forests and wetlands. Their huge eyes helped them notice movement from many directions. Once they found prey, they could change direction rapidly and close the distance in only a short time. Small flying insects had very little time to escape after they were noticed. Many tried to dive into thick plants or fly through narrow spaces between leaves, but this did not always save them. Flying insects developed different ways to reduce the chance of being caught. Some remained hidden during certain parts of the day. Others stayed close to thick vegetation instead of flying across open spaces. Many rested quietly whenever they sensed danger. Quick reactions often decided whether an insect escaped or became food for a predator. Not every predator hunted in the air. The forest floor held many hunters that searched among fallen leaves, broken branches, and damp soil. Large centipedes moved through dark places, looking for insects, young amphibians, and other small animals. Their many legs helped them travel over uneven ground, while their strong mouthparts allowed them to hold struggling prey. Once they caught an animal, escape became difficult. Early spiders also played an important role in hunting smaller creatures. Some waited patiently until prey came close enough to grab. Others actively searched through plants and across the ground. Their success depended on careful movement and quick attacks. Small insects that wandered into their reach often became their next meal. Scorpions lived in many parts of these ancient forests as well. They hid beneath fallen wood, inside cracks, and among thick plant remains. Many came out when conditions became cooler or darker. Their strong claws helped them hold prey firmly, while their stingers provided another way to stop struggling animals. Insects that crossed their path often had little chance to escape. The water contained dangers that matched those found on land. Ancient fish hunted one another in rivers, lakes, swamps, and shallow coastal waters. Some fish depended on powerful jaws, while others relied on quick bursts of speed. Small fish often traveled in groups, hoping that confusion would reduce the chance of any single individual being caught. Even so, predators regularly broke into these groups and captured their prey. Large amphibians also hunted near the edges of ponds and rivers. Many waited almost completely still until another animal moved within reach. They then rushed forward with surprising speed. Their mouths could capture insects, fish, and smaller amphibians. Young animals had to remain especially careful because they faced danger from larger members of their own environment almost every day. Life as a young animal was often much harder than life as an adult. Eggs faced danger from many hungry animals that searched for easy meals. Newly hatched insects and young amphibians were small, weak, and unable to defend themselves effectively. Many never reached adulthood because predators found them before they had enough time to grow larger and stronger. Competition added another challenge to daily life. Animals did not only struggle against predators, they also competed with members of their own species and with different species for food, space, shelter, and places to reproduce. A rich feeding area attracted many hungry animals. Even when food was plentiful, individuals still had to search carefully because others were looking for the same resources. Among plant-eating insects, competition became stronger whenever fresh growth appeared. Young leaves contained valuable nutrients that supported growth and development. Many insects gathered on the same plants, increasing the pressure on available food. If one area became crowded, insects moved to another part of the forest in search of fresh plants. This movement exposed them to unfamiliar dangers and new predators. Predatory insects also faced competition. A successful hunting area attracted many hunters. If several dragonflies searched the same airspace, each had fewer insects to catch. Every missed opportunity meant more energy spent flying without receiving enough food in return. Some individuals moved to quieter hunting grounds, while others remained and continued searching despite lower success. The need to protect territory became important for many animals. Good hunting areas, safe resting places, and suitable breeding locations had great value. Individuals often chased away others that entered these spaces. Such behavior reduced competition and increased the chance of finding enough food. Territorial behavior also protected young animals during important stages of development. Weather created additional daily challenges. Although the Carboniferous climate remained warm in many places, conditions still changed. Heavy rain flooded parts of the forest. Rising water covered nesting sites and forced animals to move. Strong winds affected flying insects by making controlled flight more difficult. Dry periods reduced water levels in some ponds and streams, concentrating many animals into smaller areas where predators could hunt more easily. Seasonal changes influenced plant growth, food supplies, and breeding activity. Fresh plants appeared at certain times, providing food for plant-eating insects. As insect numbers increased, predators also found more prey. When food became less available, many animals had to travel farther each day. Longer journeys increased the chance of meeting dangerous predators. Disease and injury created serious problems. Even a small wound could reduce an animal's ability to move, hunt, or escape. A damaged wing prevented efficient flight. An injured leg slowed movement across the forest floor. Weak animals became easier targets for predators because they could no longer react as quickly as healthy individuals. Molting presented another dangerous period for many insects. As they grew, they shed their old outer covering and formed a larger one. During this process, their new outer layer remained soft for a time. Until it hardened, they could not defend themselves well. Predators that found recently molted insects often captured them without much difficulty. Finding a hidden place during molting greatly increased the chance of survival. Reproduction required time, energy, and careful planning. Adult insects searched for suitable places to lay eggs where young would have access to food after hatching. Some selected plants that provided immediate nourishment. Others placed eggs near water because young stages developed there. Choosing the wrong location greatly reduced the survival of the next generation. Male insects sometimes competed directly for access to females. Strong flight, healthy bodies, and successful defense of good territories increased the chance of reproduction. Individuals that failed to find mates passed none of their characteristics to future generations. Natural selection slowly favored animals whose bodies and behavior improved survival and reproduction under the conditions of the time. Many predators also depended on successful reproduction to maintain their populations. Young predators needed time to learn hunting skills. Early hunting attempts often failed because prey escaped. With experience, they improved their ability to judge distance, speed, and movement. Older individuals usually became more successful hunters because they had practiced these skills over many months or years. The forests themselves constantly changed. Plants grew, died, and fell to the ground. Dead trees opened new spaces where sunlight reached the forest floor. Fresh plant growth attracted insects, which in turn attracted predators. Fallen logs created hiding places for small animals, but also served as hunting grounds for larger predators searching beneath the decaying wood. Decaying plant material supported countless tiny organisms that broke down dead leaves and wood. Small insects fed on this material, creating another important food source for predators. Every layer of the forest supported different forms of life, and each depended on the activity of others. Changes in one group affected many others living nearby. Water quality also influenced survival. Pools with enough oxygen supported healthy fish and amphibians. Stagnant water sometimes reduced living conditions for certain species. Floods carried plants, mud, and animals into new places, creating fresh opportunities but also new dangers. Animals forced into unfamiliar habitats had to adapt quickly if they were to survive. Young forests and older forests supported different communities of living things. Dense growth provided shelter for many insects, while open spaces attracted flying hunters. Animals often moved between these environments as their needs changed. A place that offered safety one day might become dangerous after predators discovered it. Many animals remained active during daylight, while others became more active during darker hours. This pattern reduced direct contact between some predators and prey, but it also introduced new dangers. No matter the time of day, some hunter was always searching for food. Resting animals still had to remain alert because danger never disappeared completely. Large insects required enough food to support their bodies. Flying demanded considerable energy, especially for giant dragonflies. Successful hunting needed strong muscles, healthy wings, and sharp vision. If several hunting trips failed, energy reserves dropped. Weakness then reduced hunting ability even further, creating a difficult cycle that threatened survival. Continuous access to prey remained essential for maintaining strength and supporting daily activity. Competition also occurred among predators of different kinds. A dragonfly hunting above a pond searched for many of the same flying insects that other insect hunters wanted. Large amphibians waiting near the water sometimes captured insects that escaped from flying predators. Spiders hiding among nearby plants also depended on insects visiting the same area. Every successful capture by one predator reduced the number of prey available to another, making each hunting ground a place where several hunters depended on the same living resources. The giant dragonflies that lived during the Carboniferous and the early Permian periods were among the most successful flying hunters of their time. They spent much of their lives searching for food, avoiding danger, finding mates, and producing the next generation. Every part of their bodies supported these daily activities. Their large wings, powerful flight muscles, excellent eyesight, strong legs, and sharp mouthparts helped them catch prey with great skill. They depended on these natural features every day because they had to eat regularly to stay alive. Without enough food, they would lose energy, become weaker, and struggle to survive in the changing environment around them. The air during this period contained more oxygen than it does today. This made it easier for many insects to grow to much larger sizes than modern insects. Giant dragonflies benefited from these conditions because their bodies received the oxygen needed to support active flight. Their large wings could carry them across forests, rivers, lakes, and swamps while they searched for prey. They did not remain in one place for long periods when hunting. They constantly moved through the air, looking for signs of small animals that could become their next meal. Their eyes played one of the most important roles in hunting. Like modern dragonflies, these ancient insects probably had very large compound eyes that covered much of their heads. Each eye contained thousands of tiny units that worked together to create a wide view of the world. This allowed them to notice movement from many directions without turning their heads. Even a small flying insect moving through the air could be detected quickly. Good eyesight helped them judge distance, direction, and speed while flying. Their brains processed information from their eyes very quickly. As soon as they noticed prey, they could change direction almost immediately. Fast reactions increased their chances of catching food before it escaped. The ability to make quick decisions during flight was important because many insects changed direction suddenly. Giant dragonflies had to respond just as quickly if they wanted a successful hunt. Flight itself was one of their greatest strengths. Their wings were long, strong, and covered with many supporting veins. These veins helped keep the wings firm while flying. They also reduced the chance of damage during normal movement through the air. The muscles inside the chest powered the wings with repeated movements. This allowed the insects to remain in the air for long periods without landing often. They could fly forward, turn sharply, slow down, speed up, and hover when needed. Hovering was useful during hunting because it allowed the insect to remain almost in one position while watching its surroundings. If prey appeared nearby, the giant dragonfly could move quickly toward it. Sometimes it may have followed an insect for several moments before making its final attack. At other times, it may have rushed forward immediately after spotting movement. Their legs were shaped to help catch prey during flight. The front legs stretched forward while the other legs moved into position to form a basket-like structure. Flying insects that entered this space could become trapped before they had time to escape. Once the prey was caught, the dragonfly held it tightly with its legs while continuing to fly or while landing on a branch or plant. The mouth parts were another important hunting tool. They were strong enough to tear through the hard outer covering of insects. After catching prey, the dragonfly used its jaws to bite into the body and eat the soft tissues inside. This process supplied the nutrients needed to support flight, growth, repair of damaged tissues, and reproduction. Every successful hunt helped the insect replace the energy it had used while searching for food. Many different insects probably became prey. Smaller flying insects were likely the most common targets because they were easier to catch. Early relatives of mayflies, primitive cockroaches, and other winged insects filled the forests and wetlands. These animals often flew through open spaces above the water or between trees. Giant dragonflies watched these areas carefully because they offered many opportunities to find food. Some prey may have rested on leaves, tree trunks, or other surfaces. When the dragonfly noticed movement, it could leave its resting place and attack quickly. In other situations, it hunted insects already flying through the air. This required excellent control of speed and direction. Catching a moving target while flying demanded careful timing. The hunter had to predict where the prey would be moments later, instead of where it had first been seen. The giant dragonflies probably hunted throughout the daylight hours because vision was most effective when enough light was available. Sunlight made it easier to detect movement and judge distance. During periods of low light, hunting may have become more difficult. Rain, fog, or strong winds may also have reduced hunting success by making flight harder and limiting visibility. Weather affected survival in many ways. Warm temperatures allowed muscles to work more effectively. Cold conditions slowed body movement and reduced flying ability. Heavy rain could damage delicate wings or make flying unsafe. Strong winds forced flying insects to use more energy. During such conditions, giant dragonflies may have rested among plants or on tree trunks until the weather improved. The forests where they lived provided many useful places for resting. Large trees, branches, leaves, and thick plant growth offered safe locations where they could remain still between hunting trips. Staying hidden reduced the chance of being noticed by predators. Rest also allowed the flight muscles to recover after long periods in the air. Although giant dragonflies were powerful hunters, they also faced dangers from other animals. Large amphibians lived in the wetlands and could attack insects that came too close. Early reptiles were becoming more common during this period. Some of these animals probably ate insects whenever the opportunity appeared. Large fish swimming near the water surface could also catch dragonflies that flew too low or landed near the edge of lakes and rivers. Young giant dragonflies faced even greater dangers. Their early life began in water as aquatic young called nymphs. These young hunters already had strong jaws and fed on smaller aquatic animals. They hid among underwater plants, fallen branches, rocks, and mud while waiting for prey. Small fish, tiny crustaceans, insect larvae, and other water animals became their food. The underwater stage lasted much longer than the adult stage. During this time, the young dragonflies grew through repeated molting. Their hard outer covering could not grow with the body, so it had to be shed several times. After each molt, the new covering remained soft for a short period before becoming hard again. This allowed the body to increase in size step by step. The nymphs depended on patience while hunting. Instead of swimming constantly, they often remained still until prey moved close enough. Then they attacked with great speed. Their special lower jaw could extend rapidly to grab nearby prey before pulling it back toward the mouth. This quick movement helped them catch animals that might otherwise escape. Living underwater brought many dangers. Larger fish hunted young dragonflies. Aquatic amphibians searched for food among the same plants where the nymphs hid. Other large insect larvae also competed for food and sometimes attacked smaller nymphs. Survival depended on remaining hidden, growing steadily and finding enough food to support development. As the young dragonflies became larger, they gradually approached the final stage of their underwater life. When fully developed, they climbed out of the water using plants, rocks, or tree roots. Their outer covering split open, allowing the adult dragonfly to emerge slowly. At first, the new wings were soft and folded. The insect pumped body fluids into the wings until they expanded completely. After waiting for the wings and outer covering to harden, the giant dragonfly finally took its first flight above the water, entering a world where every day depended on skill, speed, sharp vision, successful hunting, careful movement, and constant awareness of every opportunity and every danger that surrounded it. The prehistoric world was filled with many forms of life that lived together in forests, rivers, lakes, swamps, and open areas. Among these living things were giant insects that became an important part of the natural environment. These insects did not simply exist alongside other animals and plants. They took part in many daily activities that helped shape the ecosystems around them. Every movement, every meal, every egg they laid, and every stage of their lives affected other living things in different ways. Giant dragonflies, giant millipedes, huge cockroach relatives, large scorpions, and many other kinds of insects were connected to the environment through feeding, reproduction, movement, and their relationships with plants and animals. During the Carboniferous period, which began about 359 million years ago and ended about 299 million years ago, large forests spread across many parts of the land. The climate in many places was warm and many wetlands covered wide areas. Thick forests of giant club mosses, horsetails, ferns, and seed ferns grew close together. Fallen leaves, dead stems, and broken branches covered the forest floor. Rivers slowly flowed through many regions while swamps stayed wet for long periods. These conditions allowed many insects to find food, shelter, and places to reproduce. The forests produced large amounts of plant material every year. Leaves dropped to the ground, branches broke from trees, and old plants died as new ones continued to grow. This plant material became an important food source for many insects. Giant insects helped break down some of this dead material as they searched for food across the forest floor. As they fed on dead plants and other organic matter, they helped return nutrients to the soil. These nutrients became available for new plants to use as they continued to grow. Many giant insects spent much of their time moving through fallen leaves, damp soil, and piles of decaying plants. Their movement disturbed the surface of the ground. This activity helped mix dead plant material with soil. Small spaces opened in the ground as insects crawled through loose material. Water could move into these spaces more easily, helping keep the soil moist. Plant roots also found room to spread through the ground as conditions changed over time. Large millipedes were among the best-known animals that fed mainly on dead plant material. Some reached lengths much greater than any millipede living today. They slowly traveled across the forest floor, eating soft, decaying plants. Their feeding reduced the amount of dead material that collected in one place. As food passed through their bodies, waste was left behind on the ground. This waste contained nutrients that became part of the soil, helping support new plant growth. Other insects fed on fresh leaves, stems, spores, seeds, and soft plant tissues. Some chewed holes in leaves, while others fed on young shoots or tender parts of growing plants. Their feeding affected how certain plants grew and spread. Plants that lost too much material often had to produce new leaves or new stems. This constant interaction between insects and plants influenced the balance of life inside prehistoric forests. Some insects specialized in feeding on only certain types of plants. Others ate whatever plant material they found. This difference helped spread feeding pressure across many kinds of vegetation instead of concentrating it in only one place. As insects moved through forests searching for food, they carried tiny particles of plant material with them. Spores sometimes attached to their bodies before falling elsewhere. Although insects during this time were not the main pollinators because flowering plants had not yet appeared, their movement still helped spread certain plant materials across the landscape. Giant dragonflies were among the most successful flying predators of their time. Their large wings allowed them to travel quickly through the air while searching for prey. Their huge eyes provided a wide view of the surroundings, making it easier to detect movement below or ahead. They hunted smaller insects that flew through the forests or above rivers and swamps. Their sharp mouth parts allowed them to catch and eat prey while resting or sometimes while still flying. By feeding on other insects, giant dragonflies helped control insect populations. If certain insects became too numerous, they could consume large amounts of plant material or compete heavily with other species for food. Predators helped reduce these numbers by catching many individuals every day. This kept insect populations changing over time instead of remaining at extremely high levels for long periods. Young dragonflies lived in water before becoming flying adults. Their early stage lasted much longer than their adult life. These young forms lived in ponds, lakes, slow-moving rivers, and swamps. They hunted worms, small fish, tiny crustaceans, insect larvae, and other small animals living underwater. Their feeding linked water ecosystems with the forests surrounding them, because the adults later left the water and hunted on land and in the air. Aquatic insects formed another important part of prehistoric ecosystems. Streams and swamps contained many kinds of insect larvae. These young insects became food for fish, amphibians, and larger aquatic predators. As they grew, many emerged from the water as adults, adding new prey for flying hunters like giant dragonflies. This movement between water and land connected different parts of the ecosystem through the life cycles of insects. Many prehistoric amphibians depended heavily on insects for food. Large amphibians living near rivers and swamps often waited for insects to come close before quickly catching them. Smaller amphibians also hunted insects among wet leaves and shallow water. The number of insects available affected how much food these amphibians could find. Healthy insect populations helped support healthy amphibian populations. Early reptiles also fed on insects. Some hunted during the day, while others became active after darkness covered the forests. Different insects were active at different times, allowing reptiles to find food throughout the day and night. Some reptiles searched among fallen leaves, while others climbed over logs or entered dense vegetation where insects often gathered. Giant insects themselves also became food for larger animals. Although their large size protected some individuals from many small predators, they were still hunted by animals capable of catching them. Early amphibians, reptiles, and other large predators sometimes attacked giant insects whenever the opportunity appeared. Their bodies provided valuable nutrients that helped support these predators. When giant insects died naturally, their bodies became another source of food. Small insects, worms, fungi, and microorganisms broke down their remains. Nutrients from these bodies entered the soil and water, becoming available for plants and many other living things. Nothing remained unused for long because many organisms depended on dead material for survival. Reproduction added another important role to prehistoric ecosystems. Adult insects searched for suitable places to lay eggs where young insects would have enough food after hatching. Different species selected different environments. Some placed eggs inside moist soil, others attached eggs to plants or laid them near water. Aquatic insects often deposited eggs directly into ponds or slow-moving streams. The location chosen by adults greatly affected the survival of the next generation. After hatching, young insects immediately became part of the food web. Many were eaten before reaching adulthood. Fish consumed aquatic larvae. Small predators hunted insects living on land. Birds had not yet become important members of these ecosystems during much of this time, so reptiles, amphibians, spiders, and larger insects filled many hunting roles. The large number of young insects produced each generation helped maintain insect populations despite these losses. Molting also influenced prehistoric ecosystems. Because insects have hard outer coverings, they had to shed this covering several times while growing. The empty outer shells remained on the ground or underwater after each molt. Small organisms sometimes fed on parts of these discarded coverings. Over time, the material slowly broke down and became part of the environment. Many insects spent much of their lives searching for shelter. Fallen logs, thick vegetation, loose bark, damp soil, and piles of leaves offered protection from predators and harsh weather. As insects moved through these places, they disturbed the material around them. Small tunnels and pathways formed where insects repeatedly traveled. Other small animals sometimes used these spaces as shelter or travel routes. Seasonal changes also influenced insect activity. During wetter periods, many insects became more active because food and moisture were abundant. During drier conditions, some reduced their activity or searched for places where water remained available. Eggs, larvae, and adults often responded differently to changing environmental conditions. These patterns influenced the availability of food for predators throughout the year. The spread of giant insects into different habitats increased the variety of life within prehistoric ecosystems. Some preferred dense forests with heavy shade, others remained close to rivers or lakes. Certain insects lived mostly on the ground, while others spent much of their lives climbing plants or flying above the forest canopy. Because different species occupied different environments, they used available resources in many ways. Competition existed among insects whenever food, shelter, or breeding sites became limited. Individuals searching for the same resources often encountered one another. Stronger or faster individuals sometimes secured better feeding areas. Some species avoided direct competition by feeding at different times or selecting different food sources. These behaviors reduced conflict and allowed many species to survive together. Predatory insects often selected weaker, injured, or smaller prey because these animals were easier to capture. This helped remove unhealthy individuals from prey populations. Healthier insects that escaped predators continued reproducing, passing their traits to future generations. Over many generations, this process influenced the development of insect populations. The wings of giant flying insects allowed them to move between different habitats with relative ease. A dragonfly might hunt above a swamp during one part of the day, before moving towards a forest edge where flying insects gathered in greater numbers. This movement connected distant parts of the landscape. Energy obtained from prey in one location became available elsewhere when predators traveled or later died in another area. Some insects accidentally carried tiny living organisms on their bodies. Spores, fungal particles, and microscopic life sometimes attached to their legs or outer coverings while they crawled through damp forests. These tiny organisms could be carried to new places before falling onto fresh soil or plant surfaces. This movement helped spread many forms of small life across prehistoric environments. Water quality also depended partly on insect activity. Aquatic larvae consumed dead material and hunted smaller animals living underwater. Their feeding reduced the buildup of organic matter in some places. Waste produced by these insects entered the water, where microorganisms continued breaking it down. This constant movement of nutrients supported many forms of aquatic life. The presence of giant insects influenced where predators spent their time. Areas with many insects attracted amphibians, reptiles, spiders, and other hunters. Predators often returned repeatedly to places where food remained plentiful. As predators gathered, they also influenced the movements of smaller animals, attempting to avoid becoming prey. Different stages of insect life provided different food sources. Eggs supplied nutrients for tiny predators. Larvae became food for fish, amphibians, and aquatic hunters. Adult insects fed flying predators, ground predators, and climbing reptiles. Empty shells left after molting also supported organisms capable of feeding on leftover organic material. Every stage of life contributed to the surrounding ecosystem in some way. Large insects also affected the behavior of smaller insects. When giant dragonflies hunted overhead, smaller flying insects often changed direction suddenly, or flew into thicker vegetation to avoid capture. These repeated movements influenced where insects gathered during different times of the day. Areas with fewer predators sometimes attracted greater numbers of insects until predator activity increased again. Forest floors remained active throughout the day because insects constantly searched for food, mates, and shelter. Their movements stirred loose leaves and plant fragments. Tiny organisms living beneath this material responded to these changes as new food became available or fresh spaces opened within the soil. Over long periods, these small daily activities helped shape the structure of prehistoric forest ecosystems. Large amounts of plant growth supported many insects, while insects in turn affected how plant material moved through the ecosystem. Dead plants became food for decomposers. Living plants fed herbivorous insects. Insect predators controlled herbivore populations, and the remains of insects returned nutrients to the environment. These connected activities continued every day across forests, swamps, rivers and wetlands where giant insects lived. The end of the age of giant insects happened over a very long period. It was not caused by one sudden event. Many changes took place across the Earth, and these changes slowly affected the lives of the largest insects that had once lived in forests, wetlands, and other natural places. During the earlier parts of Earth's history, giant insects were common in many regions. Huge dragonfly relatives flew through the air, giant millipedes moved across the forest floor, and other large insects and their relatives lived among thick plants and warm, wet environments. Over time, the conditions that had allowed these animals to grow to such large sizes began to disappear. As the environment changed, giant insects faced new problems that became harder and harder to survive. One of the biggest reasons for the decline of giant insects was the gradual change in the amount of oxygen in the air. During the Carboniferous period, the air contained much more oxygen than it does today. Scientists believed that this high amount of oxygen helped insects grow much larger than modern insects. Insects breathe through tiny openings on the sides of their bodies called spiracles. Air moves through a network of tubes that carry oxygen directly to different parts of the body. This breathing system works well for small animals, but it becomes less effective as the body becomes larger. When there was more oxygen in the air, enough oxygen could reach every part of a giant insect's body. This made it possible for some species to reach sizes that would not be possible under today's conditions. As millions of years passed, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere slowly decreased. This change did not happen in a short time. It took place over a long stretch of Earth's history. As oxygen levels fell, it became more difficult for very large insects to get enough oxygen through their breathing system. Young insects growing into adults also faced greater limits because their bodies could no longer receive oxygen as easily as before. Natural selection slowly favored insects that stayed smaller because their bodies could use oxygen more efficiently under the new conditions. Over many generations, the average size of many insect groups became smaller. The forests also changed in important ways. During the earlier ages of giant insects, vast swamp forests covered large parts of the land. These forests were filled with giant club mosses, tall horsetails, seed ferns, and many other ancient plants. The ground stayed wet for long periods, and thick layers of fallen plant material collected on the forest floor. These environments provided food, shelter, breeding places, and protection for many kinds of insects. As time passed, the climate changed. Some regions became drier than before. Swamps began to shrink, and many ancient forests slowly disappeared. New kinds of plants spread into different areas, replacing older plant communities. These changes affected insects in many ways. Some lost the plants they depended on for food. Others lost safe places to lay eggs or hide from danger. Insects that could not adjust to the new environments slowly became less common. Changes in rainfall also played an important part. Wet environments that had remained stable for long periods became less dependable in some places. Rivers changed their paths, lakes dried up or became smaller. Areas that had supported large populations of insects no longer provided enough water. since many insects depend on water during part of their life cycle. Changes in rainfall affected their herbivorous survival. Eggs could dry out before hatching. Young insects living in ponds or streams could lose their homes if the water disappeared. Temperature also changed over long periods. Earth experienced shifts between warmer and cooler conditions. Some places that had once stayed warm throughout the year began to experience different weather patterns. Seasonal changes became stronger in certain regions. Giant insects that had adapted to older climates sometimes struggled to survive in these new conditions. Smaller insects often had an easier time finding shelter, hiding from changing weather and completing their life cycles. Another important reason for the decline of giant insects was the rise of new kinds of animals. During earlier periods, insects had fewer fast-flying hunters than they would later face. As Earth's animal life became more diverse, many new predators appeared. Early reptiles became more successful on land. They spread into many different environments and hunted a wide variety of prey, including insects. These reptiles could move quickly, search through vegetation, climb over fallen trees, and capture insects that were feeding or resting. As reptiles continued to develop into many different forms, they filled more habitats across the land. Some hunted during the day, while others hunted at night. This meant giant insects had fewer safe times to move around. Large insects were easier to see because of their size. Their movements could attract attention from hungry predators. Smaller insects often had better chances of hiding among leaves, bark, or soil. The appearance of flying vertebrates later added even greater pressure. The first flying reptiles entered the skies and began catching insects while flying. These animals had strong eyesight, quick movements, and growing skill in the air. Large insects that had once dominated the skies suddenly faced hunters that could chase them over long distances. Escaping became more difficult because these new predators could follow them through open air. Later, the first birds also appeared. Early birds continued to improve their flying abilities over many generations. Many of them included insects in their diet. Birds could search trees, bushes, open spaces, and wetlands for food. They could quickly catch insects resting on branches or flying above plants. Giant insects became easier targets because they were larger and easier to notice than smaller species. Competition among insects also increased. As new insect groups evolved, they spread into different habitats and developed new ways of feeding and reproducing. Some insects specialized in eating particular plants. Others became better hunters. Some learned to survive in dry places, while others adapted to forests, grasslands, rivers, and lakes. These new insects competed for food, shelter, and breeding sites. Natural selection rewarded insects that could reproduce quickly, avoid predators, and survive changing environments. Smaller body size often helped with these challenges. Smaller insects usually needed less food than giant insects. They could hide in tiny spaces that large insects could not enter. They could complete their growth more quickly and produce many young within shorter periods. These advantages became more important as environmental conditions continued to change. Plant life continued to evolve throughout these periods. Flowering plants eventually spread across much of the world. These plants produced flowers, fruits, and seeds in new ways. Many insects formed close relationships with flowering plants. Bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, and many flies became important pollinators. These insects often remained relatively small, allowing them to move easily from one flower to another. Their success showed that different body sizes could work well under changing conditions. The life cycles of insects also influenced which species survived. Many insects passed through several stages before becoming adults. Eggs hatch into young forms that feed and grow before changing into adults. Each stage may depend on different foods and habitats. Environmental changes could affect any part of this process. If one stage failed because of drought, flooding, lack of food or predators, the entire population could decline. Large insects usually needed more resources during growth. Young giant insects required enough food to support their increasing body size. If food became limited, fewer individuals reached adulthood. Adults also needed enough energy to reproduce successfully. Environmental changes made these requirements harder to meet. Some giant insects depended on freshwater habitats during their early life. Dragonfly relatives, for example, spent their young stages living underwater before becoming flying adults. Changes in rivers, lakes, and wetlands affected these young insects directly. If water became too warm, too cold, too shallow, or disappeared entirely, many young insects died before completing their development. Volcanic activity also shaped Earth's environments from time to time. Large volcanic eruptions released ash, gases, and other materials into the atmosphere. These events sometimes affected weather over wide regions. Plants could die after being covered by volcanic ash. Changes in plant life affected the animals that depended on them. Food chains shifted as different species responded to changing conditions. Giant insects living near affected areas faced additional challenges as their habitats changed. The movement of Earth's continents also played an important role over millions of years. Land that had once been joined together slowly separated into different continents. Mountains rose as large sections of Earth's crust moved against one another. Oceans opened between landmasses. These changes altered wind patterns, rainfall, temperatures, and ocean currents. As climates changed, habitats changed as well. Giant insects that had once lived across wide connected regions sometimes became separated into smaller populations. Small, isolated populations often faced greater risks of disappearing because they had fewer places to spread if local conditions became unfavorable. The changing shape of the continents also affected the spread of plants and animals. New environments appeared while older ones disappeared. Forests expanded into some areas and retreated from others. Grasslands eventually became common in many regions where forests had once grown. Insects had to adapt to these changing landscapes. Species that could not adjust gradually became less successful over many generations. The fossil record shows that many groups of giant insects slowly disappeared, rather than vanishing all at once. Different species declined at different times. Some survived longer than others, depending on where they lived and how well they adapted to local conditions. Fossils found in ancient rocks help scientists understand this slow process. They show changes in body size, wing structure, feeding habits, and distribution across different periods of Earth's history. Scientists study these fossils carefully to learn how insects responded to changing environments. Fossil wings, body parts, footprints, burrows, and preserved remains provide important information. By studying the rocks surrounding these fossils, researchers can estimate the age of the remains and understand the environments where the insects once lived. These discoveries continue to improve our understanding of why giant insects became rare, while smaller insects continue to thrive. The disappearance of giant insects did not mean that insects as a whole became less successful. In fact, insects continued to spread into almost every environment on land and freshwater habitats. Many new groups appeared, each developing features that helped them survive under changing conditions. Some became excellent flyers. Others developed powerful jaws, protective outer coverings, or specialized mouthparts for feeding on different kinds of food. Many insects formed close relationships with plants, fungi, or other animals, allowing them to survive in habitats that continued to change over millions of years.